There is a house that heats itself. No furnace, no gas line, no electricity running to a thermostat, no monthly bill arriving in your mailbox to remind you that staying warm costs money. And this is not a concept. This is not a prototype sitting in a laboratory waiting for funding. This has already been built thousands of times across thousands of years. In ancient Rome, engineers constructed thermal complexes the size of city blocks, structures that maintained precise interior temperatures using nothing but stone, airflow, and geometry. In the Persian Empire, architects designed buildings that stayed cool in deserts where temperatures exceeded 50 degrees Celsius. In ancient Greece, philosophers mapped the sun's path and oriented entire cities to harvest its energy deliberately. Then in 1972, in the deserts of New Mexico, one architect rebuilt these principles from scratch and proved they still work. And yet, today, almost no standard home is built this way. That is not an accident. That is a decision. And behind that decision is a system worth hundreds of billions of dollars that depends entirely on one thing: that your home cannot heat itself. This is what they buried, and this is how we dig it back up. Let us begin with what they do not teach in architecture school. Over 2,000 years ago, Roman engineers solved a problem that modern construction pretends is still unsolved. They called it the hypocostum, from the Latin meaning heated from below. And what they built was not a primitive fireplace. It was a fully engineered thermal distribution system embedded directly into the bones of a building. Here is how it worked. The floor was raised on small brick columns called pilae, stacks of fired clay, precisely spaced, creating a hollow chamber beneath every room. A furnace, called a prefurnium, was positioned at the building's edge. Slaves fed it wood, but the fire itself never entered the living space. Instead, hot air traveled horizontally beneath the raised floor, moving through the chamber by convection, the natural tendency of warm air to spread into cooler spaces. It did not stop there. The walls were hollow. Ceramic box tiles called tubuli were built directly into the wall structure, creating vertical channels from floor to ceiling. The heat rose through these channels. The walls themselves became radiators. The entire building, floor, walls, and ceiling, was one unified thermal system. The baths of Caracalla in Rome, completed in 216 AD, used this system to heat a structure covering more than 11 hectares. 11 hectares simultaneously, using a handful of furnaces positioned at calculated intervals. And when the fires went out, the building did not go cold immediately. This is the part that matters. The stone retained the heat. Dense Roman concrete and brick absorbed thermal energy during the heating cycle and released it slowly for hours, sometimes days, after the fire was extinguished. The building itself was the battery. The architecture was the machine. Now travel east. In the Persian Empire, engineers faced the opposite problem: not cold, but catastrophic heat. And they solved it using the same foundational logic. Use the building structure to control temperature, not a mechanical device added on top of it. They built badgirs, wind catchers, tower structures rising above the roofline, oriented precisely toward prevailing winds, channeling moving air down into the building's interior. Thick earthen walls, sometimes over a meter wide, absorbed daytime heat and released it slowly at night, stabilizing interior temperatures in climates where outdoor temperatures swung by 30 degrees Celsius between noon and midnight. Some structures used underground channels called qanats, water-carrying tunnels originally built for irrigation, to run cool air beneath the building before directing it upward through the living space. The result was evaporative, cooling and thermal regulation achieved entirely through engineering without a single moving mechanical part. In Yazd, Iran, buildings using badgir systems have been documented maintaining interior temperatures of 22 degrees Celsius when outdoor temperatures exceeded 45. No electricity, no refrigerant, no compressor. The principle across all of these systems is identical. Thermal mass absorbs and stores energy. Controlled airflow distributes it. Orientation determines how much solar energy enters and when. Dense material plus directional design plus physics equals a self-regulating interior climate. This was not folk wisdom. This was engineering. Deliberate, calculated, and repeatable. And it worked so well that these buildings stood and functioned for centuries. Then the modern world arrived and decided to start over. The knowledge did not disappear overnight. It was buried under speed. After the Second World War, the industrialized world needed housing, millions of units built fast, built cheap, built now. There was no time to study solar angles, no budget allocated for thermal mass calculations, no incentive to orient a house toward the sun when a gas furnace could be dropped into any building, facing any direction, on any lot. Speed won. And in winning, it locked in a dependency that has persisted for 80 years. But the engineers never fully forgot. In 1956, French engineer Félix Trombe, working at the National Center for Scientific Research in France, formalized what ancient builders had practiced instinctively. He designed what is now known as the Trombe wall, a system so mechanically simple that it is almost offensive in its elegance. Here is the construction. A thick masonry wall, typically stone, concrete, or adobe, is built facing the sun. In the northern hemisphere, that means south-facing. In front of that wall, separated by a narrow air gap of roughly 10 to 15 centimeters, a pane of glass is installed. Sunlight passes through the glass and strikes the dark masonry surface. The glass traps the resulting heat, the same greenhouse effect at work in every car on a summer day. The wall absorbs this energy throughout the day. At night, when outdoor temperatures fall, the wall begins to radiate that stored energy inward, slowly, steadily, for 8 to 12 hours after the sun has set. The wall is the furnace. There is no other furnace. Trombe demonstrated that a properly sized Trombe wall, roughly 0.3 meters thick, could reduce a building's heating load by 40 to 60% in a temperate climate, not 40 to 60% more efficient than an old furnace. 40 to 60% of the heating requirement eliminated entirely. Then came Mike Reynolds. In 1972, Reynolds, an American architect operating outside every conventional framework of his profession, began building what he called earthships in the high desert outside Taos, New Mexico. Elevation, over 2,000 meters. Temperature range, minus 20 Celsius in winter to over 35 in summer. Reynolds used walls packed with discarded automobile tires filled with rammed earth, thermal mass so dense and so cheap, it cost almost nothing. He oriented every structure to maximize winter solar gain. He buried the north wall into the earth itself, using the ground's stable temperature of approximately 13 degrees Celsius as a thermal buffer. The documented results are not theoretical. Earthships in Taos maintain interior temperatures between 18 and 24 degrees Celsius throughout the year, with near zero mechanical heating or cooling input. Independent monitoring studies have recorded interior temperature stability during outdoor conditions ranging from minus 15 to plus 40 degrees Celsius. A structure made from old tires and earth, outperforming a modern HVAC system in one of the most thermally demanding environments in North America. In the 1990s, German physicist Wolfgang Feist took these principles and engineered them into a precise standard: the passive house. Feist's research institution documented that buildings constructed to this standard require up to 90% less heating energy than conventionally built structures of equivalent size. 90%. Not a marginal improvement, not a rounding error in efficiency calculations. A near total elimination of heating demand through architecture alone. These are not fringe experiments. Passive House certification now exists in over 90 countries. Over 60,000 certified buildings have been constructed worldwide. The science is not in question. It was never in question. So ask yourself the investigator's question. If the Romans mastered thermal engineering 2,000 years ago, if Felix Trombe proved it in the 1950s, if Mike Reynolds demonstrated it in the desert in 1972, if Wolfgang Feist quantified it down to the decimal point in the 1990s, why does the standard home built today in 2025 still depend on a gas furnace? Follow the money. The global HVAC market, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, was valued at approximately $240 billion in 2023. It is projected to exceed $360 billion by 2030. That number does not exist if buildings heat themselves. A house that requires no furnace is a furnace that cannot be sold. A family that owes nothing for warmth is a family that cannot be metered. And a building stock designed around passive thermal principles is a customer base that has been permanently removed from the energy dependency system. This is not speculation, this is arithmetic. Now examine the mechanisms. Building codes across the industrialized world were written and are continuously updated, with mechanical heating as a baseline assumption. The codes do not prohibit passive design. They do not need to. They require heating systems capable of maintaining interior temperatures to a specified minimum, and then they allow those systems to count toward compliance. Passive design must prove itself against a mechanical standard, written by committees in which HVAC industry representatives hold permanent seats. The mortgage and insurance industries followed the same logic. A home without a conventional mechanical heating system was, and in many jurisdictions still is, classified as non-standard. Non-standard homes receive non-standard financing, higher rates, more difficult appraisals, reduced resale markets. You can build an earthship. You may struggle to get a mortgage on one. Architectural education reinforced the pattern. Schools of architecture and engineering taught mechanical systems as the default. Passive design was categorized as a specialty, an elective, a track for the ideologically motivated, not a foundational competency for every practitioner. Developers completed the cycle. Building at scale, subdivisions, apartment blocks, commercial towers, requires standardized methods that can be replicated by any contractor on any site with minimal site-specific engineering. Calculating solar angles, specifying thermal mass ratios, designing for a specific orientation on a specific lot. This requires time and expertise that mass construction timelines do not accommodate. Speed is cheaper than intelligence when someone else pays the heating bill. And so the suppression was not dramatic. There was no law passed making passive architecture illegal. There was no moment of deliberate erasure. It was quieter than that and more effective. Standard practice became mechanical heating. Deviation from standard practice became financial risk. Financial risk became the invisible wall that no architect, developer, or homebuyer wanted to stand in front of. The Romans built a system that stored heat in stone and needed no fuel. We replaced it with a system that needs fuel every single day. And then we built an entire industrial civilization around providing that fuel. What was buried here was not a machine. It was a method of thinking. Ancient builders understood that a structure is not a box you heat from the outside. It is a thermal organism. It absorbs energy, stores it, releases it, and responds to its environment if you design it to do so. Roman engineers knew this. Persian architects knew this. Felix Trombe rediscovered it. Mike Reynolds proved it in the desert. Wolfgang Feist measured it to the decimal point. The science has never failed. The system around it made sure it would never fully succeed. A home that heats itself generates no invoices, it feeds no supply chains, it creates no dependency. And dependency is the foundation on which the modern energy economy is built. But the physics cannot be repealed. And as energy costs rise, As climate pressures increase, and as the absurdity of heating poorly designed boxes with burning fuel becomes impossible to ignore, the old knowledge is returning. The only question remaining is whether we will choose to remember it, or wait until someone finds a way to sell it back to us. Hit like and subscribe. There is more buried, and we are not done digging.